back in 2013, 2014, like the first security hire happened at like 300 people. And now I know startups hiring their first security person at 30, which really like sort of like shows how important it is for companies to sort of have secure software.
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the DevSecOn community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out devsecon.com to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company, helping companies fix vulnerabilities in their open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. SNYK.io. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, president and founder of Snyk, is joined by Dev Akhawe. Dev is the head of security at Figma, the first state-of-the-art interface design tool that runs completely in your browser. Before that, Dev was at Dropbox, where he was a director of security engineering, leading application security, infrastructure security, and abuse prevention for the Dropbox products. Dev also has a PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley, where his thesis focused on web application security. We hope you enjoy their conversation, and don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back into The Secure Developer. Today we have a guest that I've wanted to bring on even from his previous job at Dropbox, and now that he is head of security at Figma, I managed to get him on here to the show, and that is Dev Akhawe. And thanks, Dev, for coming onto the show and kind of sharing some learnings here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here. Thanks.
So, Dev, before I dig in, tell us a little bit about what is it that you do and a bit of your journey of how you got into security and this spot.
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm the head of security at Figma. So pretty much all aspects of the security team at Figma, including helping the company ship secure products, assuring our customers about our security program, as well as like just improving latent risk and security hygiene and best practices across all aspects is sort of my set of responsibilities. And yeah, before that, I was leading a bunch of teams at Dropbox, working on abuse prevention, application security, infrastructure security, and detection and response and threat intel, and detection and response on the product and threat intelligence and stuff like that. I got started in security just almost out of accident. Like I was never a person, I think, who was breaking into things as a kid. I started this PhD program at UC Berkeley in computer science. And one of the things you have to figure out when you start a PhD program is, what do you want to work on? And what do you find interesting? And I remember thinking that like everything's interesting. I love computers. I love technology. I love all the things we can do with it. And security was really the only field where I felt like I could do all aspects of security, all aspects of technology and computing. So, I did measurement studies. I did formal methods. I did programming languages. I did usability studies, systems building. And so it was amazing. It was a great time. And I got into security for that reason. I like to say I got into security because I like building interesting things. And I think at that time and even today, probably the best place to build the most interesting things is security. Some of the most challenging problems, and you have an adversary that you're like continuously playing chess against. And so it's fun. I'm glad I picked working on security, and it's been fun ever since.
That's cool. That's a kind of a great motivation to get into the space. So that's awesome. Dev, maybe we'll start by just understanding a little bit the way security is structured at Figma, and maybe even we'll kind of slip back into Dropbox to compare. So can you tell us a bit about how is the Figma security organization structured?
Yeah, I mean, so right now the Figma security team is pretty small. We have 2 engineers and me really being the security engineering function. And then we also have a team that is focused on governance, risk, and compliance. So focusing on getting those our practices and our policies audited, and then showing our customers our success at achieving these certifications like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and stuff like that. And that's also important. I call it the it's not enough to just be secure. You have to also assure your customers that you're secure. So both of these things are probably what we focus on. And roughly speaking, we currently sort of work on AWS security, sort of securing our AWS setup, starting to use best practices, and then application security, so shipping hardening to our frameworks and the systems and platform we use. So for example, the security team worked on content security policy, sandboxing on the server side, additional security best practices like stronger cookies and authentication logic and stuff like that. So a pretty broad space. Like I think one of the fun things about a startup is structure of the organization, and like lines in the sand in the organization aren't that strong. Like I would honestly say that like the security team at Figma is also like a lot of the engineers at Figma. Like some of the smartest security people at Figma are not in security. They just know security so well, and that's just amazing to work in. Like being a security person where engineers are teaching you about security is absolutely amazing. And so a very different, I think, setup than what I experienced at Dropbox.
Yeah. Well, I think before we go there, that was almost my kind of next question. But just for ratio, so you have the application security team, and you separated the application security team from the security engineering team. Is that
No. So the security engineering team is a broader function. We do AWS infrastructure security and application security, and even some aspects of corporate infrastructure security, cloud security, but it's just all security engineering. It's all building systems and frameworks and reviewing code and advising developers on how to do secure development and how to keep Figma secure and customer data safe.
And how do you? So who drives the backlog of the security engineering team? Who decide? I imagine there's different requirements coming from these different facets of security.
Yeah, I think we as a team maintain sort of a risk register of what are our biggest risks and what are our biggest priorities. Separately, we also maintain a backlog of like tickets and asks from the rest of the company. But really, the execution of what we work on is driven by, first we sit together, prioritize on what we believe are the biggest risks. The inputs to this might be like the bug bounty program, pen tests, input from other engineers and leadership, and then deciding, okay, how do we want to tackle it and which order do we want to tackle it in? And then we work on that quarter by quarter. And that's been working pretty well for us. I think, again, at a startup, the set of things to do and the potential set of things to do is pretty large. And sort of me as a manager and a leader, I feel like my contribution is to make sure the team is focused and executing, because it's very easy to thrash by working on lots of different things. But I try to get us to like, let's pick something, let's pick this as a priority, focus on it, execute, and let's move to the next thing. And so the decision on what to prioritize and decision on what's our biggest risk is done as a team. But my role is to make those discussions happen and then make sure we focus and execute and do it with a great positive culture like that. That's really important to me too.
Awesome. And I guess one more question, and then we'll kind of maybe contrast this a little bit to what was the Dropbox reality. Can you describe a bit the maybe ratios or relationship between the AppSec folks and the engineering team?
Yeah, I think ratios is tricky because the Figma is a tiny company. So I would say we are at a 5% security team, and we have we're talking about a company that's like doubling every year. So it's hard to keep an exact count. But last I checked, I think we're at like 70 or 80 engineers. And so it's a pretty healthy ratio, I think, in terms of that number. The application security function is probably like 2 people working on application security and product security more broadly. And that's, 2 or so for 70 engineers is something what I would say is where we are at. But again, we are growing. The security team is doubling and the engineering team is doubling. It's an exciting time. The relationship is, I like to think it's super positive and helpful. I feel like we learn from each other. We talk to each other. I think, obviously some of the constraints. For context, I joined Figma at the start of the pandemic. I was in the first class. That was first class of newcomers who joined remotely for Figma. And so, initial hiccups around how to build strong relationships over Zoom. I had learned how to do that with a beer or a coffee, but those are no longer options. So I think, but building a strong, trusted relationship is something that we really value. And so there are lots of different aspects to it that I'm happy to dig in. But yeah, I think the relationship is not very sort of bureaucratic or defined in terms of like, these are the processes to do it. Figma is pretty small right now. And so the relationship is more through sort of a level of trust and almost social relationship that everyone sees us as hopefully as helpful and positive and someone who adds value to the discussion. And so in my experience, most teams are actually reaching out for help. One of my core thesis is that most engineers want to write secure code. Most engineers want to do the right thing. I think the security team that is helpful and seen as a positive force that is going to get them do their work more securely and explain it to them in a way they understand. Developers reach out to help, right? Like if you look on Y Combinator, right? Like any security topic is just so hot. Like every developer has opinions and thoughts and questions. So at least, I mean, that might be a privilege of the Silicon Valley bubble I'm in, but developers are super curious about security, want to learn more. They have their own lessons and learnings from previous jobs as well as internet. And I feel like that relationship, like, we are coming in as people who are experts. And so they love talking to us. It's been really positive and really great.
That's awesome. And I agree that, at that size, you don't really need sort of formal relationships. There's enough personal familiarity there. Out of curiosity, what did you land on as a replacement to sort of sitting down and having a coffee with somebody? What works best for you when you form a relationship over Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, it's been tricky. I think well, the honest answer, I think in hindsight, I'm almost finishing a year at Figma. So I think like there are many theories I had, but honestly, the sort of thing that has worked the best is working together on an incident. Like, I think if you have an incident and a startup, not necessarily even security incidents, right? Reliability, availability, any incident, anything where there's a fire and you're putting it out together, man, that builds a social bond that is hard. Like you've been in the trenches together, as one could call it. Like that's a strong bond. Like that's hard to stop. So not to say we want to have incidents, but like when you do have them, like squeeze that lemon and get it. So,
no, it's pretty awesome. It's actually, like you can probably even apply that learning a bit more concretely, because it does imply, for example, you can be tempted when there are incidents to be light on the distraction, right? To say, hey, can I just sort of deal with this without involving the other group, whether it was on the dev side or the security group. But, there is a plus. Yeah, maybe indeed sort of the lemon's the lemonade thing, but there is a plus of saying, well, make sure that at least if this happens, you use it as a collaborative opportunity.
Yes. I personally feel even strongly, and maybe again, this is a particular thing for like smaller companies, but when we started the team, one of the exercise we did was a values exercise, right? Like, because I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of smart people in the security team, and really, they are much smarter than me on figuring out the technical choices we need to make. But sort of we wanted to make sure that the team agrees on values. And one of the values we chose is, we will earn trust and not require it through authority or policy that like you must talk to security team. We'll earn the trust of the rest of the company. And second, openness. Like I think security teams that will like, say, oh, we can't tell you, you need to do this, but we can't tell you why. Or something is happening, but we can't, like it's secret. You can't. Like I think sometimes it is necessary, but very often it's not. And the value of an open security team that is like open to everyone engineering, right? And open to sort of like, hey, you can come in and help us out, or you can come in and correct us. Like one, we learn a lot from the engineering team, right? Like, because often the engineers on the team are the ones closest to the problem. But second, I think like it creates a culture of trust amongst the different teams, which is again the sort of biggest currency for a security team is how much the rest of the company trusts the security team. Like if the rest of the company is trying to figure out how to bypass it, there's no winning. There's no way a security. Yeah, exactly.
So let's indeed kind of go back a little bit and contrast. So before this, you were at Dropbox. Dropbox, clearly a substantially bigger company. Tell us a bit about the layout of the security organization there, maybe with a bias towards sort of the AppSec side of the fence, which is where I think you were most focused.
Yeah, so I started at Dropbox at a very similar size in terms of the security team. On a side note, one of the more gratifying things as a security practitioner has been that startups, like the first security hire at startups seems to happen at a smaller and smaller size over the years. Like I think like, back in 2013, 2014, like the first security hire happened at like 300 people. And now I know startups hiring their first security person at 30, which really like sort of like shows how important it is for
Indeed.
companies to sort of have secure software. But yeah, I started at a similar size, focused on application security. I think at Dropbox, what was interesting is just the sheer number of users and how attractive a target that made it. I mean, again, Figma is currently going through that growth spurt. But Dropbox was like, when I joined, it was already really popular and a very attractive target. And just the technology stack was very different. When I think of application security, a lot of the things that we are able to now use at Figma in terms of technology was just not existent then, right? So like something like Sneak or, just like to scan your dependencies, like back in 2013, 2014, oh my God, like you have to write it yourself. Something like, sandboxing, like if you want to sandbox at the server side, some code, you have to write it yourself. So I think the Dropbox security team in the AppSec space had to be larger and had to do more things, partly because of like the sort of ecosystem being much younger in security. And partly because I think Dropbox as a product was more like very widely used and was also had a desktop client, an iOS app, an Android app, a massive server-side application, a very popular API. And so the sort of the breadth and scope of things there was much bigger than I think right now at Figma. Now, obviously, I hope Figma grows and becomes that successful. But, it was a fantastic learning experience to just get that whole breadth and gamut of things to secure. But yeah, the application security team is what I was sort of initially a staff engineer. I started as an engineer, staff engineer, and then became the manager. And then over time, sort of grow into more functions. I think in terms of values, very similar. Again, something I'm passionate about, like open culture, let's earn the trust, write software, I think, rather than purely as an advisory function. And ship mitigations like ship content security policy, ship dependency scanning, ship sandboxing, and stuff like that. I think that's another approach that we have continued at Figma. And that's been really positive. I think the thing that was most noticeably different about Dropbox was also for the application security team was, again, just an earlier company. So AWS, we were a hybrid company, so we had our own data centers. We were using, internal tools like Classic Shop. So we had Fabricator installed internally. We didn't use GitHub. And so all these sort of things meant that today I can integrate Sneak with GitHub with like 5 clicks, right? But integrating something in those days when your code system and CI system is like only VPN, that's a much more complicated problem. So I think some advantages, you got to build more stuff, some disadvantages in the sense that a lot of the ecosystem was harder to start using trivially. And so that's been really exciting moving to Figma. It's just like, the tools available to a modern security team are amazing. Like you can set up a very solid security program very rapidly today. And that's great. Like makes me very optimistic about the future of software security.
No, that's awesome. And that's a really great perspective. Just an understanding of the progress that the industry has made, that we keep beating ourselves up about all the things that are not right yet. But there has been substantial improvement and also one that does try to increasingly orient towards the software development side of the fence. I'm curious, beyond the history, so you kind of made 2 points here, I think, on one or three. One is the history, the fact that this organization was built up and the tech stack was built in a different era. There's not much you can do about this when you kind of come into a company. It's either the reality or not. The second was the size, which is also probably something that just changes over time. And, probably in short order, Figma would sort of reach those sizes as well. But the third thing is interesting, which is, it has a bunch of those different clients and all that. Well, for example, Figma is I believe, much more sort of single app, on the server that you work with. Would you structure your security organization differently on that alone? If in Figma you had an iOS client and an Android client and a desktop client, and there are some conversations oftentimes around whether you should then structure your team to be more aligned with those deliverables and packages, or do you still keep them more mission oriented? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, one, again, like it's a very long topic, right? Like organizational structure for security is a thing that gets discussed a lot, but like honestly, even in the broader industry, I think of it in sort of 2 different steps. I think one, I think about it as like organizational structure is a way to like means to an end, right? You are looking to get some particular outcomes. And so if your particular goals aren't aligned with the outcomes that you want, that's something that's probably off, right? Like I think one of the exercises I remember doing that was very effective was like, let's look at what are our biggest risks, what are the things that we're really worried about, and then let's look at what our best people are working on, right? And it was pretty apparent very quickly that our best people were not working on our biggest risks or our biggest problems, and kind of makes sense because over time, right, your best people have reduced the risks. Like that's why they're your best people, and so you need to be continuously reevaluating your organizational structure and seeing whether the highest performers are working on the most important problems. In my experience, they also want to work on the most important problems. That motivates them, that excites them. So I think organizational structure is like, what is our biggest risk? What are the goals that we want to achieve? Let's structure around that. I think the mission orientation is very useful, but only in as much as it helps to serve those ends. I think just forcing an AppSec team to exist just for like, because everyone has an AppSec team, I don't think it's the right structure. So I think for some particular companies, right? So Dropbox, for example, I would say like we had an AppSec team, but there are other companies where like they're pure mobile plays, right? And so having a team that is dedicated to the iOS app or having a team that is dedicated to mobile security makes complete sense to me, right? That like if you're an Uber where all of your users and everything is happening through your mobile app, makes complete sense. Like the Snap security team should probably, I don't know, but probably does have like a focused mobile security function. So I think sort of understanding the business, understanding the risks and the outcomes that you want to achieve and structuring your organization around that is probably the most important one. The second thing I think about when it comes to organizational structure, and this one is more sort of controversial, is I think the biggest danger of organizational structure is what I call atrophy. That the AppSec team starts thinking, oh, we are the AppSec team, and those other people don't know what they're doing in security. And then like, someone else is like, well, we are the like, Mac security team, and like all these other people in security don't know what they're like. I think the organizational atrophy is very dangerous. Like in the end, we are one security team, and in the end, we are one company. And so sort of like, there is some value to just like shuffling things around just to make sure that, people don't atrophy into the structures that were made a while back to like achieve particular aims. This one's tricky because again, no one likes reorgs and shuffles, but like I think moving people around between teams, especially encouraging that through like, because there are some people who want to expand their horizons, encouraging that is a really positive outcome because you don't want these like sub silos inside a team. In the end, like all of us are working for security and for the company.
There's a lot of wisdom in sort of the stuff you said. First of all, I want to say that, I kind of caught a sentence there about sort of you need to be reevaluating your organizational structure. So your highest performers are working on the most important problems. That's just gold. I think kind of that, if all managers, kind of kept thinking about that, I think the world would be a better place. But I very much relate to sort of the switching of people around so that people learn skills. You don't have to reorg the whole thing. Do you encourage that between dev and security as well? When you think about it, the picture in your mind is mostly between the different security teams, or is it more transitioning people in and out of the security team?
We did both, I think, at different sort of levels of that. So I think one thing, some of the strongest security engineers we had at Dropbox were internal transfers from the dev teams, from the software engineering function, who are always like sort of passionate about security. And, they've been there for a while and looking for their next challenge and sort of, they're excited to come work for security, right? Like one of the most popular security projects to come out of Dropbox is the ZXCVBN password meter, like widely used, like, most companies that you've seen probably have used it, written by a software engineer at Dropbox as part of a Hackfig project. And then he was always interested in security. And I was excited that he, in the end, like sort of moved to security and worked with us for a couple of years. Like that was amazing. The other direction also has been really effective. I think security engineers moving to software teams. I haven't seen an example where like someone who really loves security moving full time, but the devs who came to security and then moved back to dev teams again has worked well. The thing that I encouraged and sort of did as like almost calling it an OKR was what we called rotations. And so what we would do is like, let's say there's a new product being built. Right at Dropbox, I was like Dropbox Paper for a while. We would just do a rotation where we would say like, someone from security team is going to go and sit with that dev team and work on anything. Like it doesn't have to be security, just be a part of that team for one quarter or a sprint. And that was super effective because like nothing beats that, like, relationship building when you are, again, in the trenches, working on something, building something new. You understand the developer's perspectives, the product manager's perspective. And, I called it the like metric of success was like, hey, you come back to the security team, and the dev team still invites you to their social events, to their team events, because that means you really sort of like gelled within the team and became a member of the team. And that's been super effective. I think the dev teams learns the security team's perspective, but also more importantly, the security team learns the dev perspective. Like, I think it's very easy to be a security team and opine on like, well, developers should do this and that. And then when you try to actually ship a product and feature and see all the things, like that the user feedback, the design choices, the product, like the complexity that goes into building a neat product is amazing. Like I am always humbled by it. And I think sort of more security engineers should experience that.
Yeah, no, I love the embedding approach, and I think it's working well. Like, I guess in that vicinity of embedding is also the practice of security champions. What's your view on it? Have you employed it? Do you employ it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it?
Security champions, absolutely, we have employed them. I think there are different ways that companies talk about security champions as a program. I think we always had security champions in different teams. We actually identified people, talked about them with, during our sort of review of risk is like, are there teams where we have high risk and we don't have a security champion? So I think the concept of security champions has been very effective. I personally sort of am cautious around creating a program and creating a sort of forced education thing, or saying like, well, if you come to this training, then you're a security champion and stuff like that. I think what I've seen to be the most effective has been, again, going back to sort of the thing I said, like some developers just really are interested in having their code be secure. And so using that sort of internal motivation and sort of encouraging that and rewarding that, giving feedback to their manager during performance review cycles, this person has helped prevent tremendous risk for the business. This person helped sort of make sure this thing ships on time and without any security issues. Stuff like that has been really positive. I've struggled to sort of structure trainings and stuff. Like I find that security champions learn the most because they're deep in the code, and when we work with them together and build that relationship.
I love that view. I think it boils down, if I kind of echo it back, you're saying security champions are good and well, and they might be sort of a tool to a degree, but what you should be wary of is not to end by saying, hey, I have these security champions. You want to still say it's a step in a journey in which developers do represent sort of security activities, security knowledge, actually implement security controls and capabilities in the product. And you want to make sure you take it all the way to actually celebrating that, acknowledging that, whether or not you did it through security champions, that's the eventual outcome. Is that correct? Yeah.
And I think really the celebrating and rewarding that is something that I think is really important. I think in the end, right, like developers caring about this for the goodness of their heart is only going to work for so many quarters, right? In the end, everyone wants to be rewarded and be celebrated for their work. And so sort of talking to their managers and saying like, during performance reviews that this person really helped out the security of the company is also pretty important, I think. The other thing I would say is like the security champion, the thing I was also trying to add is like the champions program is good, but being really respectful of the champions' time, that they're not a part of the security team. And so anytime we ask them to do something or ask for their help, just being very respectful of their time because they're helping us out is really important.
Yeah, no, very, very, very important indeed to do it. It's not just sort of free cycles; it's an actual. Yeah. They have more job as well. I wonder, Dev, if we talk a little bit around, you have all these different techniques and approaches that work. What if I flip it around? What are a couple of learnings you learned the hard way? During these journeys of something that you wouldn't repeat or you would do better.
Oh man, a lot. I mean, life's full of these lessons, right? I think one thing that I learned the hard way, probably the most important lesson I learned the hard way, is I was an academic, right? Like I finished my PhD and started at Dropbox. And I think I had this urge, and I honestly still do, right? That like when I see a bug, I used to say like, oh, why didn't they just do it this way? Or why would anyone write something like this? And it's been my experience repeatedly that almost always there is this complexity that I didn't think of, that there is a reason why someone did something that at first glance was like, why would anyone ever do this? And so I think the lesson is probably like humility around around seeing something new and a curiosity that like if I see something where it doesn't make sense to me, rather than like saying, oh, that doesn't make sense, saying why, like there must be a reason. What could be the reason? Let me try to learn it. And having that sense of humility and curiosity is something that I learned the hard way, and I think is something that honestly is so easy to forget, but it's the most important lesson. Thankfully, security is a field where I call it the like, you have to be humble, because your life as a security engineer is designing defenses that sooner or later someone breaks, either in a pen test or a bug bounty. So you're repeatedly taught to be humble. But I think that like the lesson around humility and curiosity is probably the biggest one. But a bunch of other lessons, right? Like I think something as simple as like I once sort of like set up a process around threat modeling and security reviews. I set up like this whole form that like, you can structure it and you can press this button. If you say I'm working on web, then we'll ask you these 5 questions. And it was like this interactive application. Completely failed, because turns out threat modeling as an exercise is collaborative. You don't do it alone, writing out a survey questionnaire sort of thing. You do it by working with engineers and ICs and product managers and designers and thinking together. And so a Google Doc, even if it's not like, that interactive, but a Google Doc where you can comment amongst each other, collaborate together, is much more effective than a structured format questionnaire. And so we did this work and like completely flopped and had to throw it away and go back to Dropbox paper or a Google Doc, so that like people could collaborate and work together and leave comments and questions and flags and stuff like that. So that like another like a smaller example maybe. Yeah.
No, that's an awesome learning, and it's best when they are obvious when you say them out loud, and yet you didn't really think about them before. Well, I guess Figma demonstrates that even a collaborative process can be helped with kind of the right tooling and technology, but it does mean you can structure it terribly much. You do need some degrees of freedom over there. So I think maybe pulling a little more along this thread, because I think there's a ton of experience here. I don't know if we can kind of extract enough of it in one podcast episode. But what are some other sort of tactics or tools? Like this sort of comment now on threat modeling was a great learning. What are some tactics or tools that you feel were most effective you kind of carry in your toolkit?
Again, this is controversial, but sort of like a rubric or a litmus test that I think of is I try to apologize whenever I have to tell someone to do something via like training or knowledge or consulting. Trying to rephrase that. I want to build a system where you can't write insecure code. I want to have an ORM where you can't have SQL injection. I want to write CSV and React and something like that so that you can't have XSS. And sort of like having this tactic that like the goal of a security team is to make sure that we can reason about invariance and be sure that this cannot happen, that I have enough like framework and platforms and monitoring in place is great. And so the way to do that is like anytime I find myself asking the developer, make sure you remember to do this or you remember to do that, right? Like that is not a great outcome, because relying on humans is almost always a bad idea. And not in the sense that like humans I make mistakes, right? Like I do the wrong thing when I'm coding, I forget something, right? So sort of how do anytime I find myself saying like, oh, remember to do this or make sure you check this, right? I try to think about like, well, I almost want to rephrase it as like, I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer, that I haven't automated this, or that I haven't written a system that will automatically prevent this bug. So while I try to figure that out, you need to like take care of this. And this goes everywhere in security. I feel like phishing is another example. Like I think the training users to like, hey, watch out for the URL or watch out for your password and where you type it is an anti-pattern. I think like security keys is the right pattern where like, I don't have to think about whether or not I get phished. I cannot get phished. And so while I was deploying, like, at Figma, we've deployed security keys everywhere. But for a file in the middle, I literally used to apologize, being like, I'm sorry, we haven't deployed security keys yet. So you have to be cautious around phishing. And so sort of that trick probably like that sort of has been very effective, that mental trick of remembering that like, really it's on the security team to make sure that the systems we use and the systems we build cannot misbehave, rather than telling developers you need to do these 100 things.
I love this both from an empathy perspective of sort of you're communicated to them as well. You're reminding the person you're talking to. It says like, look, I'm kind of resource constrained as well. I can't do everything that I want to do. It's an acknowledgement that you could have helped, in theory. So we're in it together. And yet, there's still the sort of the last piece of the sentence, which is you still need to do X, Y, Z, because in the meantime, we need to be secure, even though we haven't built a system that simplifies it. So I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah, you've had some great answers, Dev, that I have to ask you, like the tough one that I don't think really has an answer. All of this. How do you know that you're doing security right?
I think let's break it down into what I call metrics of progress around a particular strategy, and sort of key performance indicators on whether security is doing well. I think a lot of the times that isn't separated and it becomes confusing, right? But like, let's say you sort of decide that you want to ship CSP, or you want to sandbox memory unsafe code in the server side, right? So having a progress, like how much percentage of our code is not sandboxed, or how much of our code is not using modern frameworks, or how much of our code is still relying on whatever our old CSRF protection, how many of our repositories are not doing dependency checking, right? Like that is a very concrete measurable outcome, that like these are the things that we believe are best practices that will reduce security risk. So let's just measure how much progress we have made against these end goals or final targets, right? Now, you're right. That won't tell us how well we are doing and security as a whole, like, are we more secure, right? But it can tell us how well are we doing on the execution of things that, let's assume, will improve our security. So I think one that we should all do, right? Like, I think a lot of times I've heard people say, well, security is hard to measure, so we'll have no metrics. And I don't think that's a fair outcome, right? Like, pick a strategy and then you can measure progress on that strategy. Separately, I think how you're doing on security itself, I think the goal there is just look for insecurity, right? Like, I think, and this is a lesson learned in many other fields also, right? That, in safety also, that like you want to look for the things going wrong. You want to look and encourage people to report things going wrong. And so I think in AppSec, for example, a bug bounty program, an open vulnerability disclosure program that tells you, hey, did we have bugs? And then tell us, and then use that to measure the success of your program, right? Use that to say how well we are doing. And again, that one's tricky, right? Like, what's the metric there, right? Because if your metric is how many reports, then like it's easy to game. And especially security team is like a bunch of people who love breaking things, so they'll break that metric. But sort of like paired metrics is another really critical tool in any manager's toolkit. And so, for example, maybe you want to have a metric that says how many reports submitted, valid reports submitted to the bug bounty program, paired with our bounty amounts should keep going up, so that you're encouraging higher and higher with higher and higher incentives, people report. And then you also say, but we'll measure how many valid reports we get, so that number should keep going down. So that's one. And I think sort of like those are the outcomes to measure against, right? Like, how many employees got phished, how many compromises of employee laptops or malware did we detect? But you have to pair that with how many laptops do have security monitoring built in, because one easy way to not detect malware is to not have any security monitoring. So I think pairing metrics is probably the key tool when measuring outcomes. But also, going back to my earlier point, is that doesn't need to be that common or that complicated, right? A large number of security, we know how people get hacked. We know phishing, simple AppSec flaws and stuff like that. So rather than focusing on like measuring that and spending a lot of time, I think let's get to a place where like how many people can reason that like, yeah, we won't be phished because we have deployed security keys, or we won't have XSS because we'll have deployed CSP, or we won't have like out of date dependencies because we have this system in place that automatically scans and updates dependencies, right? Like, and those are engineering projects, and let's just measure them like any other engineering projects. And sure, like, maybe we get to a world where like then we have to really measure security, but like most breaches are not happening because of, we don't know how to measure security. It's because we are not doing stuff that we know we need to do. Scan that S3 buckets are not open to the internet, make sure that like phishing is not possible through security keys. So yeah, I
love that. It's similar but different to conversations I've been having about how I've kind of seen these sort of three different means of measuring security. And I think you're coupling two of them, which is, one is measuring security controls. I think you're talking about, measure progress against your strategy. And then the second is, I think the two others I've sort of seen are measuring output of tools, like number of vulnerabilities, and measuring red team outputs, or, kind of finding actual exploits or flaws or almost sort of pseudo breaches. And so I like your approach. I see a lot of merit in pairing the latter two, right? You're saying, okay, look for vulnerabilities because those are leading indicators, how many vulnerabilities you have in the system, but pair that with quality of how many of those are real or how many of those are reported. Yeah, I think that can be a powerful combo there.
Yeah, I think sort of the measure by capability maturity, right? Like, so you have like frameworks like BSAM or OpenSAM, and you see like these are the capabilities we want to have. And so then it again becomes a metric of like how many have we covered. And so then you can track progress that way. Or, we have internal risk matrix where we track risks in terms of simple qualitative colors, let's say red, yellow, green, blue. And we say, this quarter we will go from red to yellow to green or whatever. And I would still call out all of those in the like, you're internally measuring your own success and you're saying like, these are the capabilities and we have them. What those don't do is like, were they actually effective? And so sort of like making sure that you have a different metric that is completely outside and is completely external. And it's like, well, someone looked for a bug. We offered to pay, $50,000 for any critical bug and no one could find it. Or we ran a pen test and no one could find it. Like, I think sort of separating out those metrics is also really important, and using that as an input to your risk matrix, for example, that like if you're repeatedly getting bugs that are XSS, your risk matrix should say that the probability of the XSS is very high, right? And then your goal should be like, let's reduce that probability to low. And then that should be reflected in the bug bounty reports or pen test results that are saying, okay, now we no longer are getting XSS reports. So I think that's also another way I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all, it really, they all combine, quite well, because based on those learnings, you adapt your strategy and then you measure progress towards it, for sure. Sadly, we're out of time. We're already probably one of the longer episodes. Before I let you go, Dev, one kind of final question, I ask every guest this year. If you fast forward 5 years, where you take out your crystal ball and think 5 years out, someone sitting in your chair, right, doing the job, what would be most different about their reality? Not in Figma specifically, but rather, in the industry.
I would say, like, let me break it down into like maybe cultural, technical, and people. I think the cultural change I think will happen is more and more people would say security has to be a positive force. Security has to be a team, what I call solves for yes, rather than figures out a no. And so that cultural relationship between security and the rest of the company and rest of engineering, and security being seen as like an enabler and a positive force in the company, will keep growing. And that I'm excited for. I think on the technical front, I touched on this, but the ecosystem around security just keeps improving. It's an exciting time to be in security. I think like the different startups and tools are making things, we can do more and more powerful things, right? I think, and in particular, one of the areas that I'm excited for is probably like data. Like, I think security teams right now don't use data as widely as they should, because a lot of our tools haven't been great and like logging was expensive. But I think with modern data infrastructure, like the same reason everyone else is like able to use insights from data, I think security teams will also grow. And so we'll have like logs and analysis and machine learning models or something that will be much more powerful on that front. And even on AppSec, like I think a lot of the tools around static analysis, dynamic analysis, testing, automated testing will just become more and more powerful. So I'm excited for that. And I think around people, honestly, every year as we hire and I meet new grads and new engineers joining security teams, right? Like it's easy to forget, but like 10, 12 years ago, like new grads did not join security teams. Like new grads joined software engineering teams. But every year, new grads and new engineers who join security, who like even, I feel like an old man now, but they're at like fresh out of school, they know more about security than I did after my PhD. And they're so smart and they're writing amazing systems and have a passion for fixing security. I think like the sort of security ecosystem will have a lot of like really talented people doing a lot of amazing work and with a passion and sort of an engineering culture. And that's going to be amazing also. So yeah, on the whole, I'm super optimistic about the future, I think.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's very reassuring, because I do think you have a good pulse on things. So, hopefully that's a good crystal ball. And I think all of them make a lot of sense. Hey, Dev, this has been a true pleasure. Thanks a lot for coming on to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
And thanks everybody for tuning in. And I hope you join us for the next one.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. To find additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit thesecuredeveloper.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, find us on Twitter at @DevSecCon. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.